You start tracking your department's inventory in a spreadsheet. At first, it's perfectly fine. Then the data grows to 100 tabs, until one day, someone pastes over a crucial column and the entire system snaps. Now, you finally hit the spreadsheet breaking point. It's a stage marked by constant manual entry errors, application crashes every time you try to filter a large dataset, and monthly reporting that takes a week to compile. The natural reaction is to look for a real database, and usually the first thing that comes to mind is a heavy-duty enterprise solution like SQL Server. But then you look at the deployment requirements. You're talking about thousands of dollars in licensing, months of dedicated migration time, and a requirement for custom code that your department simply doesn't have the personnel to manage. And so you find yourself stuck in a bottleneck. The tool you have is too weak to protect your data, and the system you think you need is too complex to implement. This graphic illustrates the database spectrum. Right between those two extremes sits a middle ground. Microsoft Access is a relational database management system, or RDBMS. Because it's part of the Office ecosystem, it's actually included in most standard Microsoft 365 business licenses. Evaluating Access depends on the specific operational trade-offs your team is willing to accept. We need to determine if it bridges your data gap or simply moves the bottleneck elsewhere. Let's start with the most critical trade-off: how your data is structured and stored. Moving from Excel to Access means abandoning flat, isolated spreadsheet tabs. Instead, you build interconnected relational tables. This diagram shows how that connection works in practice. Every single record in a table gets assigned a unique ID number, called a primary key. That key draws a line directly to a matching record in your other tables, locking the data together. Because those tables are locked by that unique ID, it is nearly impossible to accidentally duplicate a customer profile or lose track of a specific invoice. Your records maintain strict integrity. The trade-off is the steep upfront learning curve. You cannot just open an Access file and start typing. You have to design the exact database architecture before you enter a single piece of data. In Excel, you have the freedom to type anything, anywhere, at any time. Access rejects that entirely, requiring strict, planned table design from day one. That upfront architectural effort demands patience, but forcing you to structure your data properly is exactly the mechanism that prevents downstream data chaos. Our second category to evaluate is the user interface and how you automate your daily workflows. Access includes built-in builders that let you design custom forms and reports, which sit right on top of those complex tables we just built. This is highly beneficial for the rest of your team. Non-technical users never have to look at the raw data tables. They simply use a clean, structured form to input new orders or click a button to generate a business summary. The downside is aesthetic. Access templates are highly rigid, and if we're being honest, they can look dated compared to modern web applications. Beyond the interface, Access lets you automate complex departmental tasks using built-in macros and Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. This diagram highlights the hidden business risk of that automation. If your department relies on a complex VBA script built by one person, and that single VBA developer leaves the company, the entire process halts. You hit a wall of key person risk. Access gives individuals the power to build robust internal applications, but it carries the risk of creating fragile, isolated systems that nobody else in the department knows how to fix. That brings us to our final evaluation criteria: cost, ecosystem integration, and the architectural limits of performance. Because Access is likely already included in your existing Microsoft 365 environment, the financial advantage is massive. You pay zero additional software costs, and you get seamless import and export capabilities with the Excel and Word documents your team already relies on. However, tying your organization to a desktop-heavy, local workflow complicates integration if your company is trying to migrate toward modern, cloud-based software tools. Here is how Access handles multi-user architecture. The back-end data sits on a central, shared network drive, while the front-end application interface is installed locally on individual user desktops. This local architecture has a strict scalability ceiling. If your dataset grows too large, or if you have too many concurrent users querying that share of drive at the exact same time, performance degrades rapidly. Pushing access past those structural limits introduces a high risk of database corruption. If that happens, you'll be forced into a costly emergency migration to SQL Server anyway. Think of Access as a high-performance engine for a small boat. It runs beautifully, but it will inevitably sink if you try to install it on a cruise ship. Let's look at this decision tree to determine exactly where your workflow belongs on the database spectrum. If you have a small budget, fewer than 15 concurrent users, and a clear need for structured data, you follow the yes route. You are the ideal candidate for Access, especially if you manage a department or small business. On the other hand, if your team requires remote-first collaboration, if you're dealing with massive datasets or zero time for structural design, you must avoid Access. Mismatching your tool to your operational scale forces you back toward the data corruption and performance lags that necessitated a database in the first place. Microsoft Access fills the functional gap between spreadsheets and enterprise servers, providing structural integrity for teams that lack a full IT department. If you deploy it, you have to follow its golden rules. Back up your data constantly, normalize your tables correctly, and respect its technical user limits. Frame your decision to use Access as an investment in temporary structure. It safely bridges the gap, buying you the organization and time you need as you work toward future scaling. If your data is too important to risk in a fragile spreadsheet, but your budget is too small for SQL, Access remains your most strategic option.